Hello, hello. Well, we returned to the Destiny versus Jordan Peterson debate for just a really small snippet of something Peterson said that this Peterson thinks was incredibly naive, and I'm pretty surprised Destiny didn't have more to say about it. Essentially, Peterson is going to argue that he thought it was very strange how during the pandemic, the left sort of switched their alliances from being very skeptical of pharmaceutical companies to just throwing in with them. The last time we looked at this video, it was about Peterson saying, well, I'm not sure if the Nazis really actually were right-wingers, which is really dumb. Now, what's going to be important for this video is sort of a breakdown of Jonathan Haidt's research on kind of like the values that people on the political left versus the political right have. A lot of you probably saw that video, but just to give a very brief sort of overview of that, people on the left are more concerned with equality, fairness, and people on the right value tradition and purity more than people on the left do. They mostly overlap. They'll agree on most things, but that's just what each side values more. And the left tends to be a little bit more individualistic, and the right tends to be a little more like top-down authoritarian. So with that in mind, we're going to listen to what Jordan has to say about the left's historical views on like big corporations.
Okay, so one of the things that I've always found a mystery, I think there's an equal mystery on the left and on the right in this regard, is that the more conservative types tend to be very skeptical of big government, and the leftist types tend to be more skeptical of big corporations.
I wouldn't say it's that the left just does not like corporations. It's more about what corporations get away with. Like, I don't have a problem with Amazon existing. I use Amazon. I kind of wish I didn't as much as I do, but it is awfully convenient and it provides a decent service. And, in a way, the more money that Amazon and Jeff Bezos makes, the more of it can be taxed and the more hopefully good things we can do with it. That's kind of a joke, but also kind of not really. No, I think the left's problem with corporations, like I said, is what they get away with. The problem is that they don't contribute their fair share. This is what Bernie Sanders is always screaming about, right? And they cheat on everything. They even when they aren't like cheating on their taxes and not contributing to society, like the poor people like us do, they're just literally horrible people and entities, and they get away with what could be considered murder in some cases. Like, just in the last year, it's closer to 2 years maybe, what are all the big stories that have come out with Amazon? Their drivers are forced to take shits in paper bags inside their vehicles because you will get fired if you make a stop and take a break during your shift, because they track absolutely everything you're doing. It's the same sort of story with people that work in the warehouses. They make you they give you a cell phone and you have to have it, and they just use that to track your movement. And there's a warehouse in the town I live in, and I just cannot fathom how big that thing is. And people that have worked there, they talk about you can't, like, your bathroom break is just enough time to walk to the bathroom from where your shift spot is and walk back. Not enough time to use the bathroom, just to walk there and then get back. And they'll just fire you if you're not moving fast enough. But it's a computer program tracking you, not a human being that has any sense of not just empathy, but common sense. I haven't heard about this one. I think maybe they ditched this idea, but Amazon was offering this thing where, like, if you buy a piece of furniture, they'll assemble it for you, but they were giving the drivers like 30 minutes to assemble furniture. And I don't know how many of you have done that before, but it seems like a simple thing, but it takes so much longer than that. And if the person pays for that service, you have to do it. But Amazon is going to say, yeah, well, if you don't get it done in the amount of time that we're allocating for it, then you're going to be punished. I mean, it's just like they set their own employees up for failure, and there's a reason for that. We'll get to it in a little bit. What else happened? There was that, I think it was in Kentucky, there was an imminent tornado warning, and Amazon was like, no, we're not shutting down this factory. If you leave, you are fired. So people stayed there, and then the tornado ripped down the factory and people were killed. There have also been internal memos that say that it's like Jeff Bezos' personal philosophy that people are just like inherently lazy. And so what they do is they bring in these new people and it's all like exciting, yay. And then they purposely work them like to their breaking points, because you start off like with a lot of motivation and then the grind just absolutely wears you down. And then they just replace them with new employees who have no idea what they're getting into. Allow me to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I've always thought it was kind of cringe when people on the left say billionaires shouldn't exist. For example, I think Bernie Sanders proposed a bill that said that you'll tax 100% of the revenue above $1 billion that's earned. And his when he was asked for comment, he said, "You can live perfectly comfy off of $999 million." Again, I've always thought of that as that was always a little bit uncomfortable for me. But then I started to think about what would a world without mega corporations look like. There's all these arguments like, well, if you take away the ability for them to be billionaires, then you de-incentivize people to work hard. And I started to actually think, good. No, not in the sense that hard work should not be rewarded, but in the sense that if we have no billionaires, then we have no Walmarts. And if we have no Walmarts, that means we have more small businesses. And we get away from building cities in the most idiotic way where all the major shopping centers are just nestled inside this one part of town, inside this parking lot the size of Rhode Island. And so cities have to be built around cars instead of people moving around freely. And it's just so ugly and gross and inefficient, and we don't do anything about public transportation. So, like I said, it's inefficient, and it doesn't work the way that it even should work given the design. But the biggest thing is, like, if you get rid of people, like, you can't have, I don't know if this is true, but I think that maybe you can't have something like Walmart or Amazon without some absolute ravenous psychopathic tycoon like the Walton family and Jeff Bezos and all that. And like I said, because of from the perspective of small business and things like that, I think that's actually a good thing. Amazon does have partnerships with small businesses, but I don't want to get into all of the ways that they also screw those small businesses. Amazon is great because it allows them to sell, but they screw them over in so many ways too. Like, for example, Amazon mandates that you sell at the lowest price on their website. So like if you have your own website, you can't offer like special discounts or anything to make it lower there. Again, you make any of these kinds of points and psychopaths like on Fox News will just scream like, oh, so you're saying that the harder people work, the less money they should make, which is idiotic because even if you're taxed higher, the more money you make, the more money you make. In fact, you just have to work harder to earn more money if you're being taxed more. But also, absolutely none of these people works harder than a nurse, a doctor, a construction worker, a teacher, etc. Maybe the strongest argument against this is that there's the innovation that takes place with these giant companies. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm all that worried about that because rich people don't innovate. Poor people or regular people who have no idea what's going to happen next, they're the innovators. You see this with Mr. Beast and his Feastables. So he's talked about this with some people. He is having a really hard time getting shelf space in supermarket stores because what happens is the big chocolate candy makers or whatever who have done nothing new in years, right? Like Hershey bars. There's like 4 different kinds, and it's been that way for 100 years. Hershey and those other companies, they buy up all the shelf space so that nobody else, like a new product, just becomes invisible. And so they don't innovate because it costs money to do innovations to try to be competitive because you're trying to compete against the next great idea. And they all just figured out, well, what if we make it so that competitors are literally invisible in the marketplace? Then we don't have to spend money on innovating. And there we go. Have you ever thought it's weird that McDonald's and Coca-Cola and whatever have so many commercials that they attach their names to everything when they're household names. Well, they don't do those commercials to get people to realize, oh, what? There's McDonald's around? That looks really good. They do so much of that because if they don't do it, then other people will advertise. Theoretically, if you spend money on ads, it should drive people to your business. But for these really giant corporations, I don't think that's actually why they're doing it. Advertising does help them make more money, but not because it drives people that wouldn't buy their product toward them. It prevents anybody from leaving. It's their Berlin Wall. Okay, the tangent is over. So now back to the left's position or take and battle with corporations. So again, it's it's not that they don't like corporations like existing. And, he didn't say that, but I don't know, it seems a little bit implicit. It's, again, just sort of what they get away with. So the left, like the traditional, in the 20th century Democratic Party, that was the party that was all about workers' rights. So unions and New Deals and good wages and Social Security. All the things that ever since Reagan, were systematically destroyed in this country. And then the neo-libs were just as awful. Was Ronald Reagan one of the 10 worst presidents ever? I don't know. I think he was probably the worst modern president, even worse than George W. Bush for all the horrible things he did. Union membership was cut in half throughout Reagan's presidency. CEO salaries rose 1,400%. The productivity has skyrocketed. Like what workers produce is, it's just, well, it's mostly been linear, I guess, but it's gone way up. But starting at his presidency, wages actually stagnated and went down. And it's not just being in bed with big corporations, giving them tax breaks and imagining that this will help out regular decent people. It's also the deregulation part of it. And this is a thing that Peterson brought up. People on the left, we want to try to use government to try to fix wrongs in the world that are caused by individuals or corporations, or just sometimes it's just accidents, right? Like if left to our own devices, we'll pollute the environment in horrible ways because we just don't know what's going on. And so you need something like an EPA founded by a Republican, Richard Nixon. When I was looking into this, I saw this personal story that this guy wrote about his experience thanks to Ronald Reagan. You guys got to read this. It's insane. I'm a severe hemophiliac. When Reagan refused to take AIDS seriously, almost 90% of severe hemophiliacs also contracted AIDS, such as myself. During this time, due to lax testing protocols, this would have been from botched blood transfusions, we were essentially given $100,000 and told to fuck off forever. Fast forward to today. I'm 42 years old, still an AIDS survivor, and incapable of working due to my health condition. My relief fund is completely exhausted because they never expected any of us to live this long. I was 2 years old when I was infected with HIV, and when I was 5, I also contracted hepatitis C due to the same lack of real testing protocols. The Reagan administration completely destroyed my life, and I'll never be able to forgive the Republican Party for these crimes against humanity. And this is the same kind of bullshit that, Jon Stewart is trying to fight for first responders and burn pit victims, too. Well, that's a little bit different. In that case, they're just denying that anything's going on, but these are the kinds of things where this is why people on the left think that, actually, you do need regulation. Now, I'm not one of those people that wishes Congress was made of 100% lefties, because I think people on the right are required to keep the pendulum from shifting too far over to one direction, basically to keep people on the left grounded. And I think people on the left are necessary to help people on the right from the same sort of runaway thing happening, because in the interest of trying to build a utopia, you can accidentally create something that is horrendous and authoritarian. Okay, let's get to the other thing that Peterson said.
And it's been shocking to me to watch the left, especially in the last 6 years, ally itself, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, which was something I'd never thought I would see in my lifetime. I mean, for decades, the only gigantic corporations the left was more skeptical of than the fossil fuel companies were the pharmaceutical companies. And that all seemed to vanish overnight around the COVID time.
The only people that the left were more skeptical of than the fossil fuel companies were the pharmaceutical companies. No. The left's hostility toward drug companies, that's a recent phenomenon, like a fairly recent phenomenon, and it's brought about from the company's greed. We'll talk about that more later. Now, it's true that, like, RFK, who was lifelong Democrat, I don't remember who that doctor that said vaccines cause autism was, but that was in, like, the late 90s, and then RFK, I think it was in the early 2000s, he sort of jumped into that. Apparently, he represented a few women in court on this thing, and so then he sort of catapulted into that, but it's never really been a major thing on the political left to be, let's say, to be skeptical of Western medicine. Now, it's very true that things like the Tuskegee study, which, if you somehow don't know about that, I think it was in the 50s, but it went on for a really long time. They took all these men from Tuskegee, which is in Alabama, I'm pretty sure, a bunch of black men, and they had syphilis. Well, I don't know if it was just men, I guess, but they all had syphilis, and they told them that they were going to treat their syphilis and do this longitudinal study where they see how it works. But what really happened, it was horrendously unethical, is they didn't treat them at all, because what it really was a study on what happens to a person who has syphilis in the long term. So they just lied and didn't give them treatment and told them that they were. Things like that can produce generational trauma. And today, I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I know that the African American community is skeptical of, vaccines and certain things like that. And you can understand why. But here's the thing. The Tuskegee study, that was carried out by the United States Public Health Department, or the United States Public Health Service, not a pharmaceutical company. I would argue that the left in general has been way more united against things like, for example, chemical companies. So you get the sort of green revolution, or whatever it's called, the environmentalist movement in the 60s, which sort of catapulted with Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. If you want to read a fascinating book about how chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers got intermingled into the environment, and a bunch of really incredible stories about it, you need to read this book called The Chemical Age. I have that book. Fantastic book. Now, the part about this that's kind of funny is a lot of the major groundbreaking events with regard to like protecting the environment, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the founding of the EPA, that all happened under Nixon. I really wish that conservatives, like nowadays, cared a lot more about protecting the environment. And you would think that they would, because they're the ones that live in the rural areas. The rural areas they have a monopoly on conservatism. And so you'd think that they would be more concerned with conservation. But I don't know, for whatever reason, because the only effective way to do conservation is to have some bureaucrat or some agency come out and test it. I don't know. They think that that's mingling into our space, so they're against it. I don't really know, but so the chemical companies, that was a big one. Then the tobacco companies, that's historically been another big one. And again, why is this? Because it's coming from the left perspective of harm reduction. The tobacco case is, this is very instructive. I'm going to put up a graph. This is a graph of the rate of, it's either cancer diagnoses or cancer deaths. I don't remember off the top of my head, but you'll see it here in the edit. Cancer over time in North America throughout the 20th century. Look at the lung cancer line. That is, it went from being one of the least common to exploding. But then it's dropped by about a third or a half. And there's pretty much like one reason for why that is. it's illegal to advertise for cigarettes on the radio or on television or anything like that. You can only do it in print, and you're not allowed to actually depict people smoking. Now, whenever we want to enact some sort of change that occurs like on the social level through legislation, what are the arguments you always hear against that? People are just going to do whatever they want anyways. It won't make any difference. Now, if you'd have been living in this time and looking at that line going up the way it is, and the fact that we know that cigarette smoking is highly addicting, it wouldn't be illogical to make that to make that assumption that, yeah, just because we change the calculus in terms of like advertising, like, are people really just robots? Do people really just pick up habits like this because they're told to from advertisements? No, people are just going to do what they do. They're going to experiment and all, whatever. Well, it turns out that that's wrong. The exact same thing happened with drunk driving. When Mothers Against Drunk Driving was formed, it made an immediate impact, and we've made huge headway on that. And did people think that trying to get rid of drunk driving was a noble cause? Well, watch this.
Any attempt to restrict drinking and driving here is viewed by some as downright undemocratic.
It's kind of getting common when a fella can't put in a hard day's work, put in 11, 12 hours a day, and then get in your truck and at least drink 1 or 2 beers.
They're making it laws where you can't drink when you want to. You have to wear a seatbelt when you're driving. And pretty soon we're going to be communist country.
Yes, keeping people from drunk driving is the slippery slope to communism. Now let's get to the point. Why was there such a left-right divide during COVID with regard to the whole vaccine thing? Well, I think one of the best arguments is the argument for the reduction of harm. And that's, I don't know if any of you remember, but that's the most common thing that I kept hearing during that time. There was all the talk about herd immunity and how vaccines provide that, and how there are certain people who are immunocompromised that can't get the vaccine. So it's sort of the collective responsibility of everybody else to make sure that we are not serving as vectors for those things to pass from one person to the other. Now, we know that's how it works with several things, and yes, with COVID, we didn't really know exactly what was going to happen. Now, even if Peterson was right that the left was historically, next to fossil fuels, was most cynical of the big pharmaceutical companies, even if that was true, I don't think the fact that the left was united for vaccines during the pandemic, I don't think that's a contradiction, because vaccines work. It wasn't just that big corporations, polluted the environment and gave people cancer and all that. It's that they lied about it. Let's think about the political left cohort for a little bit. The more highly educated you are, and if you live in suburban and urban areas, those are the people you are more likely to be on the left. So the left for a very long time has been on the side of academic institutions and science in general. It's not just that the left was fighting against fossil fuel companies and tobacco to try to reduce harm. It's that those mega corporations were lying about what they were doing and what effects their products or practices had. And they were just being completely anti-scientific. Scientists were telling the public one thing, and corporations and their government stooges were doing the opposite. And it's not like that still doesn't happen. Pretty much in the modern day, virtually all of this centers around climate change. You hear these absolutely brain-dead arguments from Republicans about how global warming, they used to just say global warming isn't even real, and they had all these dumb arguments. There hasn't been any significant warming since 1998, which was an El Nino season, but that's just flat out not even true. That one guy, Jim Inhofe, I think is his name, he brought a snowball into I think it was the Senate, to prove that global warming isn't a thing. Now they admit there's global warming, but it's Then they started to say it's not man-made, and now they say it's man-made, but there's nothing we can or should do about it. During vaccine development and rollout, conservatives, although they tend to be more aligned with big business and against big government, they didn't see it as Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson coming in to try to save the day, even though that's largely what it was. They saw it as the government doing it. That's probably in response to the schools, the businesses, and the churches getting shut down. But it's very odd to me how much opposition there was from the political right, considering that Trump was president, but it was definitely there. And again, to reiterate, I think it was from the standpoint of we had the anti-science side and the pro-science side. I mean, do you guys remember the stupid shit that people were saying back then?
Aren't you concerned you could infect other people if you get sick inside?
No.
People who don't go to this
No.
church.
I'm covered in Jesus' blood. I'm covered in Jesus'
But what
blood.
about other people who don't go to this church who you might encounter?
All of these people go to this church.
No, but you're going to be in places where other people
I go to the
are.
grocery store every day. I'm in Walmart,
What?
Home Depot, all of those
But you
people.
could get them sick from what happens in
They
the
could
church.
get me sick, but they're not because I'm covered in his blood.
Yeah, I'm immune because I'm covered in blood. I couldn't find the clip, but I think it was on The Daily Show. There were these two women being interviewed, and one of them says, well, you see, women, we can't get the virus because we vibrate at a different frequency than men. And the lady standing next to her the whole time was going, and when she gets done, she points and goes, I taught her that. She was so proud. And it was just a big load of bullshit. Speaking of the pharmaceutical companies, did you know that not a single unique drug molecule has been discovered by any pharmaceutical company in the United States for decades? They've all been discovered with public funds, and then pharma, they buy the patents, and then they play these disgusting tricks to extend their patents, establishing a monopoly and charging whatever they want for their product, because they know that people need it. Because what are they going to do? Die? They're not going to do that. So, well, some of them do because they can't afford it, I guess, but it causes unnecessary deaths. And those who can't afford the medicines, the treatments, or whatever, they can't afford other basics. This torpedoes the economy because you have people that literally can't contribute what they should be able to contribute. And the fact that conservatives don't see that, and a lot of people on the left, the Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, there's plenty of people on the left too that are in bed with these big corporations, but it's by far a bigger problem on the right, because anytime somebody proposes something that's supposed to tackle these, they're just automatically against it. So in summary, no, the pharmaceutical companies were really never a major platform or entity that the left was united against. It's starting to happen now, it's been going on for several years, but not because that they think what they produce is bad or anything like that. It's because they have disgusting, immoral practices. And people on the left are concerned about that because people on the left are concerned with reducing harm and promoting more fairness. Jordan Peterson's idea that the left suddenly shifted toward the pharmaceutical companies during the pandemic, there was no sudden shift, but even if there was, it was because they were the pro-science side, and the other side has sort of always, well, not always, but historically, just been very anti-scientific with regard to quite a lot of things. And liberals tend to be the, suburban, college-educated type. So, of course, they're going to be on the side of something where the science and the medical industries can back up the claim that this is effective. Anyways, that's my 2 cents about it, and you heard my 2 cents about a few other things as well. It's fun to be able to rant about things other than the shape of the earth here on Planet Peterson once in a while. So, anyways, in the comments, make sure you tell me what you think. If you think there are any big mistakes or errors here, go ahead and type that up, and then I'll let you know why you are wrong. Thanks for watching.